Hey everyone! Hope the Fan Gang had a great Monday. I certainly did. It was a good day. Today we are reading The Door to Saturn. Saturn. That's all over. The Invisalign braces got me there. Alright. I know nothing about this story. Almost nothing. I looked at a very brief summary, not to spoil it for myself. It's this author is recommended to me as being more Lovecraft than Lovecraft at times, which was interesting to me. But this seems like almost a Conan take on the Lovecraft mythos is what the summary sounded like, which is hard to explain, but that was my interpretation of it. This very brief summary I got was that two ancient wizards have a feud and they go to the gas giant Saturn, which I'm not sure the author knew at the time was a gas giant from the way the story sounds. But two interplanetary space wizards get up to mischief. And I knew I had to read this story just from this image here that's front and center, with them stabbing a sword between two plates of horny male. And immediately my first thought when I saw that was, oh no, dare you thrust your sword betwixt my two plates of horny male. It's very silly. But this is just classic retro weird fiction. This was before sci-fi was really a genre. This was just all fantasy back then. Sorry about that. That was my computer making noise. Alright, now we got our music on. Let's get started with The Door to Saturn, written by Clark Ashton Smith, I believe in 1931 or 2, I want to say. I didn't think to write down the name, or write down the date. But it starts with this image of two sorcerers stabbing a creature of horny male. And the saying, beyond sea and sky, the wizard Ibon pursues his outlandish wanderings. So let's begin. When Morgi, the high priest of the goddess, starting off strong, Yaounde, together with 12 of his most ferocious and efficient underlings, came at morning twilight to seek the infamous heretic, Ibon, in his house of Black Nice on a headland above the northern main. They were surprised as well as disappointed to find him absent. Their surprise was due to the fact that they had every intention of taking him unawares, for all their plots against Ibon had been carried on with meticulous privacy, in underground vaults with soundproof bolted doors. And they themselves had made the long journey to his house in a single night immediately following the hour of his condemnation. They were disappointed because the formidable writ of arrest, the symbolic flame-etched runes on a scroll of human skin, was now useless, and because there seemed to be no early prospect of trying out the ingenious agonies. The Invisalign got me. The intricately harrowing ordeals which they had devised for Ibon with such care. Morgi was especially disappointed in the malison which he muttered when the emptiness of the topmost room had revealed itself were of truly cabalistic length and fearfulness. Ibon was his chief rival in wizardry, and was acquiring altogether too much fame and prestige among the peoples of Muthulan, that ultimate peninsula of the Hyperborean continent. I might have been mistaken, because I remembered, I was thinking of Hyboria, which was one of the terms from Robert E. Howard's Conan mythos, not Hyperborean. Although it's possible it's a shared term, because that tended to happen a lot back then. Good tea. Muthulan, that ultimate peninsula of the Hyperborean continent. So Morgi had been glad to believe certain malignant rumors concerning Ibon and to utilize them in the charges he had preferred. These rumors were that Ibon was a devotee of the long discredited heathen god. Oh no, I gotta put my reading glasses on for this. Alright, let's give this a red hot go. Zathaqua. I think that's a good take. Zathaqua. Whose worship was incalculably older than man, and that Ibon's magic was drawn from his unlawful affiliation with this dark deity, who had come down by way of other worlds from a foreign universe in primeval times when the earth was still no more than a steaming morass. The power of Zathaqua. That sounds like a Star Trek term. Zathaqua was still feared, and it was said that those who were willing to forego their humanity by serving him would become the heritors of anti-mundane. Mundane. I don't know why I was saying mundane. Anti-mundane secrets. And the masters of a knowledge so awful that it could only have been brought from outlying planets. Koval with... I have to look that up. I feel like I know what it means, but I have to make sure. Originating during the same period. Lasting from the same era. Okay. A little different than what I assumed it meant. Koval with night and chaos. There you go. The House of Ebon was built in the form of a pentagonal tower and possessed 5 stories, including the 2 that were underground. All, of course, had been searched with painstaking thoroughness, and the 3 servants of Ibon had been tortured with a slow drip of boiling hot asphaltum to make them reveal their master's whereabouts. Their continued denial of all knowledge after a half hour of this were taken as proof that they were genuinely ignorant. Bit of a 40k Inquisitor moment. No sign of a subterranean passage was unearthed by delving in the walls and floor of the lower rooms, though Morgie had even gone so far as to remove the flagstones beneath an obscene image of Zathaqua, which occupied the nethermost. This he had done with extreme reluctance, for the squat, fur-covered god, with his bat-like features and sloth-like body, was fearsomely abhorrent to the high priest of the elk goddess Yonde. Returning in renewed search to the highest room of Ibon's tower, they are Inquisitors. The Inquisitors were compelled to own themselves baffled. There was nothing to be found but a few articles of furniture, some antique volumes on conjuration such as might be owned by any sorcerer, some disagreeable and gruesome paintings on rolls of that is metal. Pterodactyl parchment? That is awesome. I've never heard that before. Dude, I want some pterodactyl parchment. That's metal. Just scrolls made from dinosaur skin? That is awesome. Rolls of pterodactyl parchment in certain primitive urns and sculptures and totem poles of the sort that Ibon had been so fond of collecting. Zathaqua, in one form or another, was represented in most of these, his face even leered with a bestial somnolence from the urn handles. And sorry, that's my Discord. Mute that. There we go. Sorry about that. Urn handles. And he was found to be in half the totems, which were those of the subhuman tribes, along with the seal, the mammoth, the giant tiger, and the aurochs. Morgie felt that the charges against Ibon were now substantiated beyond all remaining doubt, for surely no one who was not a worshipper of Zathaqua would care to own even a single representation of his loathsome entity. However, such additional evidence of guilt, no matter how significant or damnatory, was of small help in finding Ibon, staring from the windows of the topmost chamber, where the walls fell sheer to the cliff and the cliff dropped clear on 2 sides of a raging sea 400 feet below. Morgie was driven to credit his rival with superior resources of magic. Otherwise, the man's disappearance was altogether too much of a mystery, and Morgie had no love for mysteries unless they were part of his own stock and trade. He returned from the window and re-examined the room with I had to take a second to parse that. Minutely careful attention. I don't know why that caught me there. Abon had manifestly used it as a sort of study. There was a writing table of ivory with reed pens and various colored inks in little earthen pots. And there were sheets of paper made from a kind of calamite, all scribbled over with odd astronomical and astrological calculations that caused Morgie to frown because he could not understand them. On each of the 5 walls, there hung one of the parchment paintings. I hope that was pterodactyl parchment. Freaking awesome, man. Dude, I really want some pterodactyl parchment. That is just so cool. I got to use that at some point. I'm geeking out over pterodactyl parchment. That is just so cool, man. It's such a load-bearing random piece of world building, and I love it because it implies that this is back during the dinosaurs. And it's such a cool concept. A friggin' dinosaur skin leather parchment. It's awesome. Okay, I have to push on. I can't keep geeking out over the pterodactyl parchment. This is like if you take me to a bookstore and I'm just sitting there obsessing over the random artwork on a cover of a book I don't even like. Oh, where was I? I'm a little hyper today. On each of the 5 walls, there hung one of the parchment paintings, all of which seemed to be the work of some aboriginal race. Their themes were blasphemous and repellent, and Zathaqua figured in all of them, amid forms and landscapes whose abnormality and sheer uncouthness may have been due to the half-developed technique of the primitive artists. Morgie now tore them from the walls one by one, as if he suspected that Abon might in some manner be concealed behind them. The walls were now entirely bare, and Morgie considered them for a long time, amid the respectful silence of his underlings, meaning they were too damn afraid to say anything when he's pissed off. A queer panel, it's a different time when they use that word, high up in the southeastern side above the writing table, had been revealed by the removal of one of the paintings. Morgie's heavy brows met in a long black bar as he eyed this panel. It was conspicuously different from the rest of the wall, being an oval-shaped inlay of some reddish metal that was neither gold nor copper. A metal that displayed an obscure and fleeting fluorescence of rare colors when one peered at it through half-shut eyelids. But somehow, it was impossible, with open eyes, even to remember the colors of this fluorescence. Morgie, who perhaps was cleverer and more... No way that's a word. Perspicacious. No way. It's a word. Having or showing penetrating mental discernment, clear-sighted, shrewd. That is such an esoteric word for perception. Goddamn. This is why I like reading public domain, because you just remember and pick up really weird old words that have fallen out of common use. And realistically, this wasn't even that long. It was like only less than a century. Anyways, I am sipping on the tangent juice tonight. Sorry about that. Perspicacious than Iabon had given him credit for being, conceived a suspicion that was apparently baseless and absurd, since the wall containing the panel was the outer wall of the building, and could give only on the sky and sea. He climbed upon the writing table and struck the panel with his fist. The sensations which he felt, and the result of the blow, were alike astounding. A sense of icy cold, so extreme that it was hardly distinguishable from extreme heat, ran along his hand and arm and through his whole body as he smote the unknown reddish metal. And the panel itself swung easily outward, as if on unseen hinges, with a high, sonorous clang that seemed to fall from an incomputable distance. Beyond it, Morgie saw that there was neither sky nor sea, nor, in fact, anything he had ever seen or heard of, or had even dreamed of in his most outrageous nightmares. He turned to his companions. The look on his face was half amazement, half triumph. "Wait here till I return," he commanded, and leaped headlong through the open panel. The charges that had been brought against Avon were indeed true. The sagacious wizard, in his lifelong study of laws and agencies, both natural and supernatural, had taken account of the myths that were prevalent in Muthulan regarding Zothaqua, and had thought it conceivably worthwhile to make a personal investigation of this obscure pre-human entity. He had cultivated the acquaintance of Zothaqua, who in the destitute, I'm assuming that's related to destitute of his worship, was now driven to lead an existence wholly subterranean. He had offered the prescribed prayers, had made the sacrifices that were the most acceptable. Excuse me. And the strange, sleepy little god, in return for Ibon's interest and his devotion, had confided to him certain information that was more than useful in the practice of the black arts. Also, he had presented Abon with some autobiographical data that confirmed the popular religions in the more explicit detail. For reasons which he did not specify, he had come to Earth in former aeons from the planet Psychronosh. Sure. The name by which Saturn was called in Muthulan. And Psychronosh itself had been merely a way station in his travels from remoter worlds and systems. As a special reward, after years of service and burnt offerings, he presented to Ibon a large, thin oval plate of some ultra-telluric metal, instructing him to have it fitted as a hinged panel in an upper room of his house. The panel, if swung outward from the wall on open air, would have the peculiar property of giving admittance to the world of Psychronosh, many millions miles away in space. According to the vague and somewhat unsatisfactory explanation vouchsafed by the god, this panel, being partly wrought from a kind of matter which belonged to another universe than man's, possessed uncommon radiative properties that served to ally it with some higher dimension of space, through which the distances to astronomically remote spheres was a mere step. Zothaqua, however, warned Ibon not to make use of the panel unless in time of extreme need, as a means of escape from otherwise inevitable danger, for it would be difficult, if not impossible, to return to Earth from Psychronosh, a world where Ibon might find it anything but easy to acclimate himself, since the conditions of life were very different from those in Muthulan, even though they did not involve so total an inversion of all terrain standards and norms as that which prevailed in the more outlying planets. And Saturn is pretty outlying. Because I mean, I don't think it's logarithmic in distances, but it's pretty far out there. It's past Jupiter. Like, once you get past the asteroid belt, the distances in the solar system are just huge. And even then, within the asteroid belt, it's huge. This was the 30s. They didn't know shit. Some of the Zothaqua's relatives were still resident in Psychronosh and were worshipped by its peoples. And Zothaqua had told Abon that almost unpronounceable name of the most powerful of these deities, saying that it would be useful to him as a sort of password if he should ever need to visit Psychronosh. The idea of a panel that would open on some remote world impressed Abon as being rather fantastic, not to say far-fetched. But he had found Zothaqua to be, in all ways and at all times, a most voracious deity. However, he made no trial of the panel's unique virtues, to Zothaqua, who maintained a close surveillance of all underground doings, had warned him of the machinations of Morgi and the processes of ecclesiastic law that were being instituted in the vaults below the temple of Yonde. Knowing as he did the power of these jealous bigots, Ibon decided that it would be injudicious to the point of folly if he were to let himself fall into their hands. Bidding a short and grateful farewell to Zothaqua, and collecting a small parcel of bread and meat and wine, He retired to a study and climbed upon the writing table. Then, lifting aside the crude picture of a scene in Psychronosh, with which Zothakwa had inspired some primeval half-human artist, he pushed open the panel and had served to conceal. Got mixed up there. Ibon saw that Zothakwa was indeed a god of his word, for the scene beyond the panel was nothing that could ever find a legitimate place in the topography of Muthalan or of any terrestrial region. It did not altogether appeal to him, but there was no alternative save the inquisitorial cells of the goddess Yunde, envisaging in thought the various refinements and complications of torture which Morgi would have now prepared. He sprang through the opening into Psychronosh with an agility that was quite juvenile for a wizard of mature years. These thin columns get me. It was only a step, but turning he saw all trace of the panel or of his dwelling had now disappeared. He was now standing on a long declivity of ashen soil, down which a sluggish stream that was not water, but some liquescent metal resembling mercury ran from tremendous unscalable shoulders and horns of the mountain heights above, to debouch in a hill-surrounded lake of the same liquid. The slope beneath him was lined with rows of peculiar objects, and he could not make up his mind whether they were trees, mineral forms, or animal organisms, since they appeared to combine certain characteristics of all of these. This preternatural landscape was appallingly distinct in every detail, under a greenish-black sky that was overarched from end to end, with a triple cyclopean ring of dazzling luminosity. The air was cold, and Ibon did not care for its sulfurescent odor, or the odd puckery sensation it left in his nostrils and lungs. And when he took a few steps on the unattractive-looking soil, he found that it had disconcerting friability of ashes that had dried once more after being wetted with rain. He started down the slope, half fearing that some of the equivocal objects around him would reach out their mineral bows or arms to arrest his progress. There seemed to be a kind of bluish-purple obsidian cacti, with limbs that ended in formidable talon-like spines, and heads that were altogether too elaborate for either fruits or blossoms. They did not move as he passed among them, but he heard a faint and singular tinkling with many modulations of tone that preceded and followed him along the slope. Ibon conceived the uncomfortable notion they were holding converse with each other, and were perhaps debating what should be done with him or about him. However, he reached without mishap or hindrance the end of the declivity, where terraces and ledges of decomposing trap, like a mighty stairway of elder aeons, had rimmed the sunken lake of liquescent metal. Wondering as to the way he should now take, Ibon stood irresolute on one of the ledges. His train of conjecture was broken by a shadow that fell suddenly athwart him? Above and behind? Like you're thwarting someone? I guess so. Athwart him and lay like a monstrous blot on the crumbling stone at his feet. He was not prepossessed by the shadow. It was outrageously defiant of all known aesthetic standards, and its malformation and distortion were no less than extravagant. He turned to see what manner of creature had flung the shadow. This being, he perceived, was not easy to classify, with its ludicrously short legs, its exceedingly elongated arms, and its round, sleepy-looking head that was pendulous from a spherical body, as if it were turning a somnambulistic... Okay, look, I'm sorry for the break again, but I have to look that up. Somnambulistic. Of or pertaining to some... Can't use the same word in it. Zombulist. A person who is subject to some... Stop using the word in the definition! The hell? One who walks in a sleep, a sleepwalker. Got it. Thank you. You didn't have to use the word in definition like 3 times. Assholes. Alright, let's try this word again. Somnambulistic somersault. So, a drifty, sleep-like somersault, I guess. I'm having trouble seeing that in my mind's eye. But okay. But after he had studied it a while and had noted its... Oh god, furries. Get it out. Furriness and somnolent expression, he began to see a vague, though inverted likeness to the god Zothaqua. And remembering how Zothaqua has said that the form assumed by himself on Earth was not altogether that which he had worn on Psychronosh, Eibon now wondered if this entity was not one of Zothaqua's relatives. He was trying to recall the almost inarticulable name that had been confided to him by the god as a sort of password, when the owner of that unusual shadow, without seeming to note Eibon's presence, began a descent of the terraces and ledges toward the lake. Its locomotion was mainly on its hands, for the absurd legs were not half long enough for the steps it had to take. Arriving at the lake edge, the creature drank of the fluid metal in a hearty and copious manner that served to convince Eibon of its godship. For surely no being of an inferior biologic order would quench its thirst with a beverage so extraordinary. Then, reascending to the ledge where Eibon stood, it paused and appeared to notice him for the first time. Eibon had finally remembered that outlandish name for which he was groping. It's... good god. Where do I start with this? Holy hell. His Zilp Kyoganaza. His Zilp. Okay, well look, I got it out once, I'm not gonna try again. It is, in fact, barely speakable. What the? Uh-oh. My camera seemed to disconnect. Hello? There we go. Okay. That's odd. Okay. That word he sought to articulate, doubtless the result was not wholly conformable to Psychronosian rules. But Eibon did the best he could with the vocal organs at his command. I feel you, brother. His auditor seemed to recognize the word, for it peered at Eibon a little less sleepily than before, with its inversely situated eyes. What does that mean? Inversely situated? Like, did my... Why is my... Hold on. V-Bridger keeps disconnecting on me. Sorry about the beeps, that was me. Okay. I'll just leave you up, I don't trust you. Maybe the eyes are stacked one above the other instead of side by side? I don't know. Moving on. And even Dane Dud or something which sounded like an attempt to correct his pronunciation. Eibon wondered how he was ever to learn such a language, or, having learned it, he was ever to pronounce it. However, it hardened him a little to find that he was understood at all. Zothaqua, he said, repeating the name 3 times in his most orotund and canterary manner. Okay, V-Bridger is just freaking out tonight. Let me reload that. Sorry, everyone. I love technical difficulties because they give me dead air to fill. Connecting. Okay. Let's... Please just work. It's an iPhone. It's supposed to just work. That's what I heard. Screw you, Apple. Zothaqua, he said, repeating the name 3 times in his most orotund, incantatory manner. The topsy-turvy being opened its eyes a trifle more, and again admonished him, uttering the word Zothaqua with an indescribable abbreviation of vowels and thickening of consonants. Then it stood regarding him for a while, as if in doubt or cogitation. Finally, it raised one of its elongated? Is he trying to say that? Elongated arms from the ground and pointed along the shore, where the mouth of a low valley was discernible among the hills. It said distinctly the enigmatic words, Eque de los Arclong. We'll just pretend I didn't make those sounds and we'll roll on. And then, while the sorcerer was pondering the significance of his unusual locution, it turned away from him and started to reascend the higher steps toward a rather spacious cavern with columned opening. That he had not heretofore perceived. It had hardly passed from sight into cavern when Abon was greeted by the high priest Morgi, who had readily followed him by his tracks in the ashen soil. "Detestable sorcerer! Abominable heretic! I arrest you!" said Morgi with pontifical severity. Ibon was surprised, not to say startled, but it reassured him to see that Morgi was alone. He drew the sword of highly tempered bronze which he carried and smiled. "I should advise you to moderate your language, Morgi," he admonished. "Also, your idea of arresting me is slightly out of place now, since we are alone together in Sakranash, and Muthulan and the temple cells of Yonde are many million miles away." Morgi did not appear to relish this information. He scowled and muttered, "I suppose this is some more of your damnable wizardry." Ivan chose to ignore the insinuation. "I have been conversing with one of the gods of Sakranash," he said. I am being just loaded with words today. Magnanimously. I'm just gonna pretend that's magnanimously. The god, whose name is Hisquilmagazar, has given me a mission to perform, a message to deliver, has indicated the direction in which I should go. I suggest that you lay aside our little mundane disagreement and accompany me. Of course, we could slit each other's throats and eviscerate each other, since we are both armed, but under the circumstances, I think you will see the puerility, not to mention the sheer inutility of such a proceeding. If we both live, we may be of mutual use and assistance in a strange world whose problems and difficulties, if I mistake not, are worthy of our united powers." Morgi frowned and pondered. "Very well," he said grudgingly. "I consent. But I warn you that matters will have to take their course when we return to Muthalan." "That," rejoined Ivan, "is a contingency which need not trouble either of us. Shall we start?" The two Hyperboreans had been following a defile that wound away from a lake of fluid metal among hills whose vegetation thickened and grew more various as their height decreased. It was the valley that had been indicated to the sorcerer by the topsy-turvy biped. Morgi, a natural inquisitor in all senses, was plying Abon with questions. Abon? Was I saying Ibon? Doesn't matter. "Who or what was the singular entity that disappeared in a cavern just before I accosted you?" "That was the god, his And who, pray, is this god? I confess I have never heard of him." "He is the paternal uncle of Zothaqua." Morgi was silent, except for a queer sound that might have been either an interrupted sneeze or an exclamation of disgust. But after a while he asked, "And what is this mission of yours?" "That will be revealed in due time," answered Abon with sensuous dignity. I am not allowed to discuss it at present. I have a message from the god, which I must deliver only to the proper persons. Morky was unwillingly impressed. Well, I suppose you know what you are doing and where you are going. Can you give me any hint as to our destination? That too will be revealed in due time. I like making that voice. The hills were lapsing gently to a well-wooded plain whose floor would have been the despair of earthly botanists. Gardeners of boats. Botanists. Beyond the last hill, Avon and Morgy came to a narrow road that began abruptly and stretched away in the distance. Avon took the road without hesitation. Indeed, there was little else to do, for the thickets of mineral plants and trees, were rapidly becoming impenetrable. They lined the way with serrated branches. There were like sheaves of darts and daggers, of sword blades and needles. Avon and Morgy soon noticed that the road was full of large footprints, all of them circular in form, and rimmed with the mark of protruding claws. However, they did not communicate their misgivings to each other. After an hour or two of progress along the yielding, ashy thoroughfare, amid the vegetation that was more horrent than ever with knives and caltrops, the travelers began to remember that they were hungry. Morgy, in his haste to arrest Avon, had not breakfasted. And Avon, in his natural— okay, this is going to be a really random tangent that it's neither here nor there, but that's an improper use of breakfast, because that's implying its original use as breaking fast, which is a Christian thing they did in the morning because their culture back then in medieval or Dark Age times, whatever, post-Roman Christendom, was— we're not going to get into this. I'm going to move on. We're going to move on. I'm not going to stop here for 10 minutes to explain this. And Avon, in his natural hurry to evade Morgy, had committed a like omission. He grabbed some meat and bread and wine. I remember. I was there. They halted by the wayside, and there we go. Sorcerer shared his parcel of food and wine with the priest. They ate and drank with frugality, however, since the supply was limited and the landscape about them was not likely to yield any viands that were suitable for human sustenance. The story's cool. With strength and courage revived by this little reflection, they continued their journey. They had not gone far when they overtook a remarkable monster that was plainly the originator of the numerous footprints. It was squatting down with its armored haunches toward the travelers, filling the whole road for an indeterminable distance ahead. They could see that it was possessed of a myriad short legs, but they could form no idea of what its head or forequarters were like. Avon and Morgy were much dismayed. "Is this another of your gods?" asked Morgy, ironically. The sorcerer did not reply, but he realized that he had a reputation to sustain. He went boldly forward and cried out, "Is that?" in the most resonant bellow that he could summon. At the same time, he drew his sword and thrust it between the two plates of the horny mail that covered the monster's hindquarters. Oh, he dares. He's going for the horny mail. Greatly to his relief, the animal began to move and resumed its march along the road. The Hyperboreans followed it, and whenever the creature slackened its pace, Avon would repeat the formula which he had found so effective. Morgy was compelled to regard him with certain awe. They traveled on in this manner for several hours. The great luminous triple ring still overarched to the zenith, but a strangely small and chilly sun had now intersected the ring and was now declining toward the rest of Psychnosh. The forest along the way was still a high wall of sharp, metallic foliage, but other roads and paths and byways were now branching off from the one that the monster followed. All was very silent, except for the many-footed shuffling of this uncouth animal, and neither Avon nor Morgy had spoken for miles. The high priest was regretting more and more his rashness in pursuing Avon through the panel. And Avon was wishing that Zothoka had given him the entree to a different sort of world. They were startled out of their meditations by a sudden clamor of deep and booming voices that rose from somewhere in advance of the monster. It was a veritable pandemonium of unhuman guttural bellowings and croakings, with notes that were somehow suggestive of a proof of objurgation, like shrewish drums, as if the monsters were being scolded by a group of unimaginable entities. "Well," queried Morgie, "all that we are destined to behold will reveal itself at the proper time," said Avon. The forest was thinning rapidly, and the clamor of termagant bellows was drawing closer, still following the hindquarters of their multipedal guide, which was crawling on with a reluctant slowness. The travelers emerged in an open space and beheld a most singular tableau. The monster, which was plainly of a tame and harmless and stupid sort, was cowering before a knot of beings no larger than men who were armed only with long-handled goads. These beings, though they were bipeds, were not quite so unheard of in their anatomic structure as the entity which Ivan had met by the lake, were nevertheless sufficiently unusual, for the heads and bodies were apparently combined in one. In their ears, eyes, nostrils, mouths, and certain other organs of doubtful use were all arranged in somewhat unconventional groupings on their chests and abdomens. Penis chest. They were wholly naked and were rather dark in color, with no trace of hair on any part of their bodies. Okay, it's tangent time. They're on Saturn with a distant and dim sun, so they would be pale. Probably. Unless there's a... We're moving on. I'm not going into the chemistry. We're moving on. The bodies. Behind them, at a little distance, were many edifices of a kind which hardly conformed to human ideas of architectural symmetry. Avon strode valorously forward, with Morgie following discreetly. The torso-headed beings ceased their scoldings of the fawning monster and peered at the Earthmen with expressions that were difficult to read on account of the odd and baffling relationship of their features. Said Avon, with oracular solemnity and sonority. Then, after a pause of heretic length, the result was indeed gratifying, as was all that could be expected, even from a formula so remarkable. For the Psychronosian beings dropped their goads and bowed before the sorcerer till their featured bosoms, penis chests, almost touched the ground. I have performed the mission. I have delivered the message given me by his Akala, said Avon to Morgie. For several Psychronosian months. What does that mean? Psychronosian months. So, that's implying that it's based off of Earth months. So the implication is that there's 12 Psychronosian months. And Saturn's orbit is so goddamn huge. How many Earth years is a Saturnine orbit? Look, I'm going on this tangent. You can't stop me. We're on the road. It's already happened. Saturn orbital length in years. This tangent has already happened. All that's left is for us to catch up to it. The orbit of Saturn. How long is a year on Saturn? Can I just get a year? It takes Saturn 29.5 Earth years to complete a revolution. So, get my calculator out. We're going all the way with this tangent. 29.5 times 365 equals 10,767.5 days divided by 12. So 897.3 days for a Cyclone month. So several. So that's 7 times 7. So for 6,281 days. Aren't you glad we went on that tangent? Aren't we glad we knew the note? Aren't you glad we know how long a month is on Cycronosh / Saturn now? For, I already closed calculator, I forgot the number. Shit. For several thousand days, the two Hyperborean, excuse me, the two Hyperboreans were the honored guests of this quaint and worthy and virtuous people who called themselves the Blimfroins. Blimfroins. Okay. The Blimfroins. Okay. Okay. I needed this laugh. This is a good Monday, y'all. Avon had a real gift for languages and made progress in the local tongue far more readily than Morgie. His knowledge of the customs, manners, ideas, and beliefs of the, the Blimfroins. Oh my god. I'm gonna call someone that. You're a Blimfroin. Soon became extensive. But he found it a source of disillusionment as well as of illumination. The armored monster that he and Morgie had driven before them so valiantly was, he learned, a domestic beast of burden that had strayed away from its owners amid the mineral vegetation of the desert lands adjoining Vlor. The chief town of the the Blood Points. I'm sorry, that name is just so silly. The Blood Points. The genuflections with which Aebon and Morgie had been greeted were only an expression of gratitude for the safe return of this beast, or were not, as Aebon had thought, an acknowledgement of the divine names he had quoted in the fearsome phrase, Equid las elonque. The being that Aebon had met by the lake was indeed the god Hizlogma. And there were dim traditions of Zethaqua and certain early myths of the Blimfroins. But this people, it seemed, were most regrettably materialistic and had long ceased to offer sacrifice and prayer to the gods. Though they spoke of them with a sort of distant respect, and with no actual blasphemy. Aebon learned that the words Eque de las Adlonc doubtless belonged to a private language of the gods, which the Blimfroins no longer understood, but which, however, was still studied by the neighboring people, the Idims. Idims? I'm gonna say Idims, who maintained the ancient form of worship of Selakwanga and various related deities. This is very silly. This got very silly very fast. The Blimfroins were indeed a practical race, and had few, if any, interest beyond the cultivation of a great variety of edible fungi, the breeding of large centipedal animals, and the propagation of their own species. So the penis chest fucked a lot. The Blimfroins. I gotta move on. I gotta get through this. Oh wait, we're going in their sexual world. Oh my god, this story. The latter process, as revealed to Aebon and Morgie, was somewhat unusual. Though the Blimfroins were bisexual, only one female in a generation was chosen for reproductive duties, and this female, after growing to mammoth size on food, their feeders? Oh my god. This is more wild than Rats in the Walls. I wasn't expecting this. Oh my god. Mammoth size on food prepared for from a special fungus became the mother of an entire new generation. When they had been well initiated into the life, did they fuck? Did they get it on with the mammoth? Okay, I have to move on. When they had been well initiated into the life and customs of Valor, the Hyperboreans were privileged to this. I can't take this story seriously anymore. I got a headache from laughing too much. Oh man. The Hyperboreans were privileged to see the future national mother called the Dizinquum? Okay. Who had now attained the requisite proportions after years of scientific. Man, they got this on lockdown. They know what they're doing. The blimp primes. She lived in an edifice that was necessarily larger than any of the other buildings in Valor, and her sole activity was the consumption of immense quantities of food. Excuse me. The Sorcerer and the Inquisitor were impressed, even if not captivated, by the mountainous amplitude of her charms, and by their highly novel arrangement. They were told that the male parent, or the parents, of the forthcoming generation had not yet been selected. Oh, where is this going? Oh god, please no. Okay. The possession of separate heads by the Hyperboreans seemed to lend them a remarkable biologic... Oh, what's going there? Biologic interest in the eyes of their hosts. The Blimphroins, it was learned, had not always been headless, but had reached their present physical conformation through a slow course of evolution, in which the head of the archetypal Blimphroin had been merged by imperceptible degrees with the torso. But unlike most peoples, they did not regard their current stage of development with unqualified complacency. Indeed, their headlessness was a source of national regret. They deplored the retrenchment of nature in this regard, and the revival of... It's going there, man. I see where this is going. Oh god, no. The arrival of Avon and Moriki were looked upon as ideal exemplars of cephalic evolution. Okay, I have to look up cephalic. I have to know. Oh, we're relating to the head. Okay, that's better than I assumed. Cephalic evolution had served to quicken their eugenic sorrow. Excuse me. The Sorcerer and the Inquisitor, on their part, found life rather dull among the Blimphroins. After the first feeling of exoticism had worn off, the diet was tiresome for one thing. An endless succession of raw and boiled and roasted mushrooms, varied at rare intervals by the coarse and flabby meat of tame monsters. And this people, though they were always polite and respectful, did not seem to be greatly awed by the exhibitions of Hyperborean magic with which Abon and Moriki favored them. And their lamentable want of religious ardor made all evangelistic endeavor a thankless task. And being fundamentally unimaginative, they were not even duly impressed by the fact that their visitors had come from a remote ultra-Cycronosian world. Excuse me. I laughed too much. I feel, said Abon to Moriki one day, but the god was sadly mistaken in deigning to send this people a message of any sort. It was very soon after this that a large committee of the Blimphroins waited upon Abon and Moriki and informed them that after long consideration, they had been selected as the fathers of the... Can I go to the next page? There we go. Next generation, but were to be married. Oh no. Oh no. Married forthwith to the tribal mother, in the hope that a well-headed race of Blimphroins would result from the union. Oh no. Abon and Moriki were quite overcome, I bet, by the proposed eugenic honor, thinking of the mountainous female they had seen, Morgie was prone to remember his sacerdotal vow of celibacy. Well, that's unfortunate. And Abon was, excuse me, eager to take similar vows upon himself without delay. The story is very silly, but it's very entertaining. Excuse me. I just laughed too much and I'm all flimmy. I'm gonna mute myself for just a moment so I can blow my nose. Okay, you know, I will say that my thumbnail is living up. This is Space Wizard hijinks. Okay, where was I? Result from the Union. Excuse me again. Coughing too much. No, I was further on. Without delay. The Inquisitor, indeed, was so overwhelmed as to be rendered almost speechless, but with rare presence of mind. The sorcerer temporized by making a few queries anent that legal and social status which would be enjoyed by Morgie and himself as the husbands of the Junquam, and the native Blumfroins told him that this would be a matter of brief concern, that after completing their marital duties, the husbands were always served to the national mother in the form of ragouts and other culinary preparations. The Hyperboreans tried to conceal from their hosts the reluctance with which they both regarded the coming honor in all its stages. Being, as usual, a master of diplomatics. Okay. Abon went so far as to make a formal acceptance on behalf of himself and his companion. But when the delegation of Blimfroins had departed, he said to Morgie, "I am more than ever convinced that the god was mistaken. We must leave the city of Lore with all feasible dispatch and continue our journey till we find a people who are worthier to receive his communication." Apparently, it had never occurred to the simple and patriotic Blimfroins that the fathering of their next national litter was a privilege that anyone would dream of rejecting. Abon and Morgie were subjected to no manner of duress or constraint, and their movements were not even watched. It was an easy matter to leave the house in which they had been domiciled. Excuse me. When the rumbling snores of their great host were ascending to the great rings of the Cycronosian moons. It's a lot of moons. In Saturn, I think. And to follow the highway that led from Vlor toward the country of the Ademes. The road before them was well marked, and the ring light was almost as clear and brilliant as full day. They traveled a long distance through the diversified and always unique scenery, which it served to illumine. Before the rising of the sun and the consequent discovery of their departure by the Blimfroins. These single-minded bipeds, it is likely, were too sorely perplexed and dumbfounded by the loss of the guests, whom they had chosen as future progenitors, to even think of following them. The land of the Ademes, as indicated on an earlier occasion by the Blimfroins, was many leagues away, and tracts of ashen deserts of mineral cacti, of fungoid forests, and high mountains intervened. The boundary of the Blimfroins, marked by a crude sculpturesque representation of the tribal mother beside the way, was passed by the travelers before dawn, and during the following day they journeyed among more than one of those unusual races whose diversity, I think that's a typo, diversity, so widely, I see. Those unusual races who diversify so widely the population of Saturn. Excuse you, it's called Cycronosh. They saw the Digibes, that Apterous and Stylotean bird people who roost on their individual Dolomites for years at a time, and meditate upon the cosmos, uttering to each other at long intervals the mystic syllables yelp, yeep, and yoop, which are said to express an unfathomed range of esoteric thought. Oh, 3 syllables, huh? 3 smart birds. And they met those flibbertigibbet pygmies, the Ephiques, who hollow out their homes in the trunks of certain large fungi and are always having to hunt new habitations because of the old ones crumble into powder in a few days. And they heard the underground croakings of the mysterious people, the Grongs, who dread not only the sunlight, but also the ring light. Yeah, that tracks, because it's an ice ring, so it would be reflecting light. That tracks. And who have never yet been seen by any of the surface dwellers. By sunset, however, Avon and Morgie had crossed the domains of all aforementioned races, and even climbed to the lower scarps of those mountains who still divided them from the land of the Ademes. Here, on a sheltered ledge, their weariness impelled them to halt. And since they had now ceased to dread pursuit from the Blubfroins, they wrapped themselves more tightly in their mantles against the cold after a meager supper of raw mushrooms and fell asleep. Their slumber was disturbed by a series of cacodemoniacal dreams in which they both thought they had been recaptured by the Blumfroins and were forced to espouse the Dejinkum. They awoke shortly before dawn from visions whose details were excruciatingly vivid and were more than ready to resume their ascent of the mountains. Their slopes and cliffs above them were desolate enough to have deterred any travelers of inferior hardihood or less cogent fears. The tall woods of fungi dwindled ere long to the tiny growths, and soon they lessened to forms that were no bigger than lichens. And after these, there was nothing but black and naked stone. The wiry and slender Avon suffered no great inconvenience from the climb, but Morgie, with his sacerdotal girth and bulk, was soon winded. Badass. Whenever he paused to recover his breath, Avon would say to him, "Think of the National Mother." And Morgie would climb the next acclivity like an agile but somewhat asthmatic mountain sheep. Oh, these assholes. They came at noon to a pinnacle-guarded pass from which they could look down on the contrary of the Ademes. They saw that it was a broad and fertile realm, with woods of mammoth mushrooms and other thallophytes that excelled in size and number those of any other region they had yet traversed. Even the mountain slopes were more fruitful on this side, for Avon and Morgie had not descended far when they entered a grove of enormous puffballs and toadstools. They were admiring the magnitude and variety of these growths when they heard a thunderous noise on the mountains above them. The noise drew nearer, gathering to itself the roar of new thunders. Avon would have prayed to Zalakwa, and Morgie would have supplicated the goddess Yunde, but unfortunately, there was no time. They were caught in a mighty mass of rolling puffballs and toppling toadstools overthrown by the huge avalanche that had started on the heights above, and borne with increasing momentum, with vertiginous speed and tumult amid an ever-growing heap of shattered fungi. They finished their descent of the mountain in less than a minute. Endeavoring to extricate themselves from the pile of thallophytic debris in which they were buried, Avon and Morgie noticed that there still seemed to be a good deal of noise, even though the avalanche had stopped. Also, there were other movements and heavings than their own in the pile. When they managed to get their necks and shoulders clear, they discovered that the commotion was being made by certain people who differed from their late host, the Blumfroins, in that they possessed rudimentary headlets. These people were some of the Ademes, on one of whose towns the avalanche had descended. Roofs and towers were beginning to emerge from the massive boulders and puffballs. And just in front of the Hyperboreans, there was a large temple-like edifice, from whose blocked-up door a multitude of Ademes had now tunneled their way. At sight of Avon and Morgie, they suspended their labors, and the sorcerer, who had freed himself and had made sure that all his bones and members were members were intact, now took the opportunity to address them. Hearken, he said with great importance. I have come to bring you a message from the god Zoklama. I have borne it faithfully on ways beset with many hazards and perils. In the god's own divine language, it runs thus. Equidalash Adlonkra. Since he spoke in the dialect of the Blubfroins, which differed somewhat from their own, it is doubtful that the Deems altogether understood the first part of his utterance. But Hezekla was their tutelary deity, and they knew the language of the gods. At the words, Equidalash Adlonkra, there was a most remarkable resumption, an increase of activity, a ceaseless running to and fro on the part of the Adeems, a shouting of guttural orders, and a recrudescence of new heads and limbs from the avalanche. Those who had issued from the temple re-entered it and came out once more carrying a huge image of, I'm getting tired of this word, Hizzy. A huge image of Hizzy. Some smaller icons of lesser, though allied deities, and a very ancient looking idol, which both Abon and Morgi recognized as having a resemblance to Zathakwa. Others of the Adeems brought their household goods and furniture forth from the dwellings, and signing the Hyperboreans to accompany them, the whole populace began to evacuate the town. Abon and Morgi were much mystified, and it was not until a new town had been built on the fungus-wooded plain at the distance on a full day's march, and they themselves had been installed among the priests of the new temple, that they learned the reason of it all and the meaning of Equidalash Adlonkra. These words merely meant merely, be on your way, and the god had addressed them to Abon as a dismissal. But the coincidental coming of the avalanche and of Abon and Morki with this purported message from the god had been taken by the Adeems as a divine injunction to remove themselves and their goods from the present location. Thus, the wholesale exodus of the people with their idols and domestic belongings. The new town was called Glom. After some Dr. Seuss shit. It was called Glom, and after the one that the avalanche had buried. Here, for the remainder of their days, Abon and Morki were held in much honor, and their coming with the message Equidalash Adlonkra was deemed a fortunate thing, since there were no more avalanches to threaten the security of Glomp and its new situation remote from the mountains. The Hyperboreans shared the increment of civic affluence and well-being resultant from this security. There is no national mother among the Adeems, who propagated themselves in a far more general manner than the Blumfroims, so existence was quite safe and tranquil. Abon, at least, was really in his element, for the news which he brought of Zathakwa, who was still worshipped in this region of Sychranosh, had enabled him to set up a sort of minor prophet, even apart from the renown which he enjoyed as the bearer of the divine message, as the founder of the new town of Glom. Good team. Morgi, however, was not entirely happy. Though the Adeems were religious, they did not carry their devotional fervor to the point of bigotry or intolerance, so it was quite impossible to start an inquisition among them. But still, there were compensations. The fungus wine of the Adeems was potent though evil tasting, and there were females of a sort, if one were not too squeamish. Consequently, Morgi and Abon both settled down to an ecclesiastic regimen, which, after all, was not so radically different from that of Buthalon or any other place on the planet of their birth. Such were the various adventures, and such was the final lot of this redoubtable pair in Sychranosh. But in Avon's tower of Black Gneiss, on that headland of the northern sea in Muthalon, the underlings of Morki waited for days, neither wishing to follow the high priest through the magic panel, nor daring to leave in disobedience of his orders. At length, they were recalled by a special dispensation from the Hierophant, who had been chosen as Morgi's temporary successor. But the result of the whole affair was highly regrettable from the standpoint of the hierarchy of Yonde. It was universally believed that Abon had not only escaped by virtue of the powerful magic he had learned from the Zothakwa, but had made away with Morgi in the bargain. As a consequence of this belief, the faith of Yonde declined, and there was a widespread revival of the dark worship of Zadakwa throughout Muthalan in the last centuries before the onset of the Great Ice Age. I think this is just another story starting. Yeah, we're gonna skip that. I'm not sure that's related. Alright, that was The Door to Saturn, Interplanetary, Primeval Space Wizard hijinks. That was a good story. I enjoyed that a lot. That was not at all what I was expecting. that was just a genuinely fun romp. Oh boy. Alright, so tomorrow I believe we are playing more Nobody Wants to Die. Thursday we're playing more Heavenly Bodies. And Thursday there's going to be a change. I have decided with all the changes in my audio and visual stuff since the last Helldivers drop, and because this coming one will be the finale, that I'm going to put it on hold for the time being. And in the meantime, I will be recording and putting up the individual drops as pre-made videos that are up to date, basically. And with a nice new shiny thumbnail I'm commissioning as well. And then once those are out, then I will put out 7 as the finale to cap it off. This is because I'm sure everyone is aware of the going-ons of Helldivers 2 and Arrowhead Doves and whatnot. I'm over it now. I've just moved on from the whole situation. I caught up my block pill with the game and I just dropped it. So it's whatever. But because that is hard for me to write it, Helldivers Quest right now, so I just need some time and distance to get past it, to come back to it, because I do like the story and I like the characters of what I've written in Helldivers Quest so far. So I don't want to just clean drop it, because I've given up on the game for now. So I'm thinking in about a month or 2, we'll get around to it. But before then, I'll start recording and putting up the individual videos of Helldivers Quest drops. And once it is all together, all 7 drops, it will be combined into one large video. That'll probably be about 2.5 hours, I think. So they're about 20-30 minutes each, so that'd be actually closer to 3, wouldn't it? Maybe 3.5. Doesn't matter. Point being, a set of Helldivers Quest drop 7 this Thursday. We will be playing more crossover Roll for Initiative. It's RPG related. Yeah, it's a fun game. We'll play that. And Friday has kind of become just a bonus day, where if I feel like streaming and don't have anything else to do, I'll stream on Fridays. But I'm not going to add that officially to my schedule. That'll just be a bonus day. But anyways, I will see everyone tomorrow at 1:30 a.m. Eastern. So I hope everyone has a fantastic Tuesday. I will see everyone. I hope you really enjoyed this story, because I had a lot of fun reading it. I also hope you enjoy my new audio, because I got a new mic. Hopefully it sounded good this session. But I will see everyone tomorrow. Have a great Tuesday, everyone. See ya.